When the doctor leaned closer to me that afternoon, his hand still holding the blood pressure cuff, I thought he was going to remind me about drinking more water or cutting down on salt. Instead, his voice dropped so low I almost wondered whether I'd imagined it. "Double-check your caretaker," he whispered, eyes flicking toward the door as if someone might be listening. It wasn't the words alone that chilled me. It was the fear tucked behind them. Doctors don't whisper warnings unless something is terribly wrong. I'm 67 years old, a black woman born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, and I've lived through enough storms to know when someone's trying to protect me. But I'd never heard a doctor speak like that in all my years. I watched him straighten his coat, clear his throat, and return to his normal professional tone as he told me about adjusting the dosage on my pain medication because my hip still hadn't fully healed. I nodded as if everything was normal, but inside, something tightened. His warning wouldn't leave me. Double-check your caretaker. Why would he say that? What did he see? As I walked out of the clinic, cane tapping lightly against the tile, I replayed the last few weeks in my mind. My recovery had been rougher than expected. After my fall and hip surgery, my son and daughter-in-law insisted I needed help around the house. "Just until you're steady on your feet again, Mama," my son had said. I love him. I really do. He's my only child, and I raised him on my own after his father passed. But he trusts his wife far more than he trusts his own instincts. And she's polite enough, but always with a distance. Like she's acting in a play where she has to pretend to care, but doesn't quite remember the lines. She was the one who found Marcy, the caretaker. A woman in her mid-30s, light-skinned with a thin smile that never quite reached her eyes. She talked fast, moved fast, and always seemed to be in a hurry, even when there was nothing urgent to do. In the beginning, I told myself it was fine. I didn't want to be a burden. And she did help, brought groceries, warmed meals, reminded me about ice packs, kept the living room tidy, but there was always something off. She watched my medicine cabinet too closely. She asked strange questions about who had keys to my house, and sometimes she would linger near my bedroom door longer than felt natural. Still, I brushed it off. I'm from a generation where you don't assume the worst until the worst shows up on your doorstep. I thought maybe she was just trying to be thorough, or nosy. Plenty of folks are nosy without being dangerous. But that whisper from the doctor echoed through my chest the whole drive home. I even parked in the driveway for a moment before gathering the courage to walk inside. Funny how your own house can suddenly feel unfamiliar. When I pushed open the door, the living room was quiet. Too quiet. Marcy's purse was on the entry table, but she was nowhere to be seen. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I moved slowly, careful with my hip, and headed toward the kitchen. That's when I noticed the first thing. The cabinet where I kept my medication was slightly open. I always close it fully, habit from years of keeping things neat. But now it hung there, like someone left in a hurry. I opened it, and the second thing struck me harder than the door frame ever did. My pill bottles were rearranged, not just shifted a little, completely reorganized. The bottle I always kept on the left was now sitting on the right. The label wasn't facing forward the way I always leave it. One bottle felt lighter in my hand, and another had a tiny smudge near the cap that hadn't been there that morning. A cold pressure settled in my chest. I picked up the bottle of pain medication and shook it gently. I know the sound of my own pills, every rattle, every count. Something was off. I unscrewed the cap and my stomach practically fell through the floor. The pills on top weren't the same shape as the ones from my prescription. These were slightly more rounded, a different shade of white. Someone had tampered with them. Just then, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, heavy, coming from my bedroom area. Every muscle in my body tightened as I turned toward the sound. For a split second, I thought about the doctor's warning again. He must have seen something in my chart, maybe a pharmacy alert. Something serious enough for him to whisper that instead of writing it down. And here I was, standing in my kitchen, holding a bottle of pills that had been changed while I was gone. The footsteps stopped. Then Marcy appeared around the corner, forcing a smile. "Oh, you're home early," she said, wiping her hands on a towel even though I hadn't seen her cook a thing. Her eyes darted to the medication in my hand. Just a flicker. Barely a second. But I saw it. Guilt, panic, or recognition. And that was all I needed to know, that something about this woman was deeply, dangerously wrong. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I've learned through the years that when danger is close, you don't jump, you observe, you gather, you wait for the right moment. So I smiled back just as soft and fake as hers and said, "Yes, I'm home." But inside, my spirit was already shifting. Something dark was creeping into my home, hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of help. And that whisper from the doctor had just pulled the veil off the truth. Someone wasn't taking care of me. Someone was preparing to harm me. And I had no idea how deep the plan went, or who else was involved. I didn't sleep the night my pills were rearranged. The house felt different. Still mine, but colder around the edges, like someone had cracked a window and let in a draft I couldn't see. Every time the refrigerator hummed or a floorboard creaked, my heart jumped a little. It's strange how a simple shift of objects, a few pills out of place, can make you feel like a stranger in your own home. I sat in my recliner with a blanket around my shoulders, pretending to read a church newsletter while keeping one eye on the hallway where Marcy had walked earlier. She had gone to bed quickly, almost too quickly, claiming she was exhausted from cleaning, though the house looked the same as when I left for my appointment. Around midnight, something inside me settled into a cold realization. The doctor hadn't whispered that warning by accident. He must have seen something, inconsistent records, a flag in the pharmacy system, or maybe even a history tied to the caretaker my daughter-in-law hired for me. Whatever it was, it had been serious enough that he leaned in, lowered his voice, and risked breaking protocol. And now here I was, alone in a quiet house with a woman who had access to every part of my life, including the medication keeping me stable after surgery. By 2 a.m, I decided to get up and walk around, partly to stretch my hip, but mostly to reassure myself that nothing else had been moved. Savannah nights are humid, even in early spring, and the air inside my house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I moved slowly through the kitchen, steadying myself on the counter. The cabinet was still closed, but when I reached for it, my fingers trembled. I opened it again. All the bottles were exactly where they'd been after I adjusted them earlier, meaning they weren't where I had left them that morning. That alone was enough to send another wave of dread through me. I checked the labels carefully. My blood pressure medication looked untouched. My vitamins were fine, but the pain medication, the one bottle I needed the most, still had those unfamiliar pills mixed in. Half of them were my original ones, half were replaced. That kind of tampering wasn't an accident. No one makes mistakes like that. You don't accidentally swap prescription-strength medication. That requires intention, purpose, planning. When I screwed the cap back on, a floorboard creaked behind me. I froze. It wasn't loud, but in that quiet house, every sound was magnified. I turned slowly, expecting to see a shadow, a movement, something. But the hallway was empty. The door to Marcy's room was closed. I stood still for nearly a full minute, barely breathing, listening for anything else. Then, from behind the door, I heard something soft, too soft to be purposeful, but loud enough to know it was a person shifting their weight. It sounded like someone stepping away from the door. Had she been standing there, watching me, listening? A shiver ran down my spine. I clutched the edge of the counter until the tremor in my hand eased. I went back to my recliner, turned on the small lamp, and sat where she could see me if she came out, but where I also had a clear line of sight to the hallway. I didn't trust the dark. Not anymore. Morning came slowly, sunlight pushing through the blinds like it was hesitant to enter. My hip ached, but I forced myself up before Marcy began her morning routine. If she had tampered with my medication once, I wasn't going to give her a second chance. She came out of her room right at 7, hair pulled back, wearing the same polite smile that now felt like a mask made of thin plastic. "Good morning," she said. "Did you sleep okay?" I watched her eyes. Not the smile. Smiles lie, eyes don't. And her eyes flicked to the cabinet, just for a split second, before meeting mine. That tiny movement told me everything I needed to know. "I managed," I said, keeping my voice even, "but I need to go back to the doctor today." Her expression didn't falter, but her chin lifted slightly. "Attell. Today? So soon?" "Yes," I replied. "He asked me to come in." That wasn't true. Not yet, but I wanted to see how she reacted. And the way her lips pressed tightly together, the way she blinked twice too fast, told me she didn't like the idea. Not one bit. "Well," she said after a moment, "I'll drive you." "No," I answered quickly. "My neighbor is taking me." Another lie. But necessary. I wasn't getting in a car alone with a woman who had already tampered with my medication. Her smile flickered. "If you say so." I watched her walk past me to the kitchen. Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of her checking the pill cabinet. She opened it quietly, but not quietly enough. The soft click of bottles, the subtle rustle of her adjusting something. Or looking for something. She was checking her work, and in that moment, standing in my own living room with sunlight warming the floor but nothing warming my chest, the truth settled fully. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. Someone wanted me weak, confused, or worse. And whoever that someone was, Marcy, my daughter-in-law, or both, they were getting bolder. I tightened my grip on my cane, feeling a strength rise in me I hadn't felt in years. Whatever game they were playing, I wasn't going to be the easy target they thought I was. And that's when the real story began. To understand how everything spiraled into danger, you need to know the life I had before all this. Quiet, steady, and built on routines that kept me grounded long after my husband passed. I've lived in the same small house on the east side of Savannah for nearly 40 years. It's a modest place, painted soft yellow with white trim, a porch big enough for 2 rocking chairs, and an old pecan tree that drops nuts across the yard every fall. My husband planted that tree the year our son was born. Every time I sit under it, I feel both of them close. The man I lost too soon, and the little boy who once begged me to bake pecan pie every Sunday. That boy is grown now, with a wife and a busy life of his own. He works long hours at a logistics company, sometimes traveling 2 or 3 weeks at a time. I don't blame him for not being around much. Life demands things from all of us. But I do sometimes wish he'd slow down long enough to notice when something feels wrong in his own mother's home. His wife, on the other hand, has never quite warmed to me. We've had polite conversations and stiff hugs, the kind where both people lean in but keep their bodies far apart. She isn't cruel, not openly, but there is a coldness in her that I've learned to keep my distance from. Before my fall, I was independent. I handled my bills, mowed my own small lawn, and drove myself to church every Sunday morning without fail. I volunteered with the Senior Outreach Program, packed lunches for the homeless, and taught the little girls at church how to braid hair without hurting each other's scalp. My days were full enough to keep loneliness away, and my nights were peaceful. When you live alone long enough, your home takes on your rhythm. You know every sound, every creak, every pattern of light that falls through the curtains at dusk. Nothing feels threatening because everything belongs to you. All that changed the morning I slipped on my back porch and tore the ligaments around my hip. One moment I was sweeping leaves, and the next the world tilted sideways and pain swallowed my breath. The surgery went well, but recovery was slow, and my son panicked. He insisted I couldn't stay alone. I tried to protest, but he'd already talked to his wife, and the decision had been made. "Mama, we're hiring someone to take care of you," he said, "just for a few weeks." I agreed because arguing would have only made him worry more. That's how Marcy came into my life. A stranger with a recommendation from my daughter-in-law and a resume full of past clients I never had the chance to verify. From the moment she walked into my home, I felt something strange, an energy that didn't quite match her polite tone. She was careful with her words, overly sweet in her kindness, but her eyes scanned my house like she was inventorying everything in it. I brushed it off as nerves. People act strangely on the first day of a new job, but as the weeks passed, her presence settled over my home in a way that didn't feel right. There were small things at first. She would open mail that wasn't hers to open. She'd ask whether I had a will and who handled my accounts. She made comments about the value of my home and how lucky I was to live in a place like this. I told myself it was harmless curiosity. People talk. People pry. But something in her tone always felt like more than just talking. Then came the bigger things. She began memorizing my medication schedule better than I did, insisting on handling every pill I took. If I said I felt fine, she'd give me a look that made me feel like a child. If I asked about a bottle looking lighter or different, she'd laugh softly and say, "You must be remembering wrong." The worst part, she said it in a voice so gentle I almost doubted myself. That's how it starts. Little by little, someone shifts your reality until you don't know where the truth ends and their version begins. My son never noticed. He rarely saw me alone without his wife present, and whenever I mentioned feeling uneasy, she'd wave it off. "Marcy's wonderful, Mom," she'd say, using that overly bright tone people save for when they're hiding irritation. "You're lucky to have her." She repeated it so often it felt rehearsed, but the doctor noticed something. Maybe the refill schedule looked strange. Maybe he saw discrepancies in how the medication was being managed. Maybe he'd seen this pattern before in other older patients who trusted the wrong people. Whatever it was, his whisper wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was urgent. And it came from someone who had no reason to lie to me. So here I was, a woman who once controlled every detail of her home, now second-guessing every sound, every shadow, every movement of a caretaker who had access to my bedroom, my medicine, my life. Nothing felt safe anymore, not even the walls my husband built with his own hands. The rhythm of my home was gone, replaced by a steady drumbeat of suspicion I could no longer ignore. Something dangerous was unfolding quietly under my roof, and I was finally beginning to see it. The first real sign that something was wrong came so quietly that if I hadn't been paying attention, I would have missed it. One morning, while I was sipping my tea at the kitchen table, I noticed Marcy standing by the counter with my pill organizer in her hands. She wasn't preparing my medication for the day. She wasn't even facing me. She was staring at the pills, counting, recounting, then writing something down in a little notebook she kept in her pocket. When she realized I was watching, she snapped it shut so fast the sound echoed against the tiles. "Oh, just checking your dosages," she said with a smile too bright to be sincere. "You know how important consistency is." I nodded, but something in her tone didn't sit right. She wasn't speaking like someone helping an elderly woman recover. She sounded like someone tracking a schedule for reasons that had nothing to do with me. A caretaker should be focused on the person, not the pills. Another time, I caught her near my bedroom door. She had her hand on the knob, just resting there like she was weighing whether to go in. My bedroom is the one place in the house I keep private. Even my son knows that. When she saw me watching from the hallway, she jerked her hand back and muttered something about just checking if you needed blankets. In early spring in Georgia, my house wasn't cold, and she knew it. But the moment that broke whatever trust I was clinging to happened late one afternoon when I returned from physical therapy. I walked in through the front door, tired, leaning heavily on my cane, and heard her in the kitchen speaking in a hushed voice. Her back was turned to me, but her words drifted through the air clear enough. "No, not yet," she whispered. "She's still taking them. Yeah, I know what the doctor said, but trust me, she's not catching on." My heart stopped so suddenly that I forgot to breathe. She wasn't talking about dishes or chores. She was talking about me, about my medication, about not catching on. I stepped forward so quietly she didn't even hear me behind her. When I said her name, she jumped, the phone nearly slipping from her hand. Her smile came on too fast, too forced. "Oh, you're home early." I wanted to ask her who she'd been talking to. I wanted to ask her what exactly she thought I hadn't caught on to. But something inside me told me to stay quiet, to observe. When you live alone for years, you develop instincts, sharp ones, and mine were screaming at me to keep my cards close. Her odd behavior only escalated after that. She started taking long walks around my house when she thought I was napping. I heard her opening drawers she didn't need to open. Once I discovered she'd moved my bank statements from the living room desk to a drawer in the guest room. She claimed she was organizing, but I've seen good organizers. Marcy wasn't organizing. She was hunting. And then there was the way she kept asking about my family, questions that didn't belong in any normal conversation. Does your son handle your finances? Who has power of attorney? Has your will been updated since your surgery? No caretaker needs to know any of that, unless they're planning something that has nothing to do with care. But the moment that truly set every alarm bell ringing happened on a Sunday morning. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., unable to sleep, and quietly shuffled to the kitchen for water. I didn't turn on the lights. The moon from the window lit the room enough to see shadows and shapes. And there, by the cabinet where I kept my medication, stood Marcy. She froze when she realized I was behind her. "I was just restocking," she said, her voice trembling for the first time instead of overly sweet. Restocking? At 5:30 in the morning? With no new medicine bags? No supplies? No reason to be there? She stepped aside quickly, blocking my view with her body as she moved away. My heart hammered hard enough to shake my ribs. I waited until she left the room, then checked the cabinet. The bottles weren't just shifted, they were opened, and one had a small white pill lying next to it on the shelf like she had fumbled and forgotten to hide it. I picked it up and held it under the dim light. It wasn't one of mine. This house, my sanctuary for 40 years, suddenly felt like enemy territory, and the woman who was supposed to help me heal felt more like a threat, creeping silently through my routines, waiting for me to let down my guard. I didn't know what her plan was yet. I didn't know who she was talking to, but I knew this much. Something wasn't right, and the deeper I looked, the more I realized I wasn't dealing with a mistake. I was dealing with intent. The first undeniable proof that something was deeply wrong appeared on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, a day that should have been ordinary. I had just returned from a follow-up appointment with my physical therapist, tired but feeling proud of myself for walking a few extra steps without the cane. When I stepped through the door, I noticed immediately that the house felt disturbed. Nothing dramatic, nothing overturned or broken, but it carried the strange stillness of a room someone had just left in a hurry. Cushions, slightly shifted. My reading glasses placed upside down instead of beside the lamp. Small things. Tiny, almost invisible. Unless you know your home like a second skin. I called out for Marcy, but she didn't answer. Part of me hoped she had stepped out for groceries, but it was too quiet, too staged. I walked toward the kitchen, careful with my hip, feeling a sense of dread rising in my chest even before I knew what I was about to find. When I opened the medication cabinet, a faint smell of mint and something sharp, almost chemical, hit my nose. I reached for the pill organizer I kept on the top shelf. It was warm, as if someone had held it just moments earlier. My heart began beating harder. Inside, the pills were not in the order I had arranged them that morning. I know my system. Pain medication in the left row, vitamins in the middle, blood pressure pills on the right. But now, the pattern was wrong. Several of the compartments were open when they should have been shut. Worse, when I lifted the Monday slot, a small chalky film clung to the bottom. Pills that have been dissolved or crushed leave that kind of residue. I sat down at the table because my knees suddenly felt weak. My hands trembled as I poured the pills into my palm. Some were the right shape, but not all. A few were smoother, slightly rounder, a shade whiter, almost glossy. Wrong. Completely wrong. I reached for the bottle they were supposed to come from and twisted it open. Inside were pills that looked different from the ones in my hand, and that's when something happened that sealed the truth for me. One pill, a tiny oval tablet, slipped from my fingers and rolled to the edge of the table. When I picked it up, I noticed something faint, almost invisible, a tiny scoring mark like someone had tried to scratch off a number or a symbol. Prescription pills don't come like that. I've been taking medication long enough to know what's normal and what's not. A chill spread through me so fast it made me dizzy. Someone wasn't just mixing up my medicine, someone was replacing it. I placed every bottle side by side and examined them one by one. The caps had microscopic scratches around the rims, as if they'd been opened and closed repeatedly. Not by a pharmacist, not by me, but by someone in this house. My breath caught. Someone wanted the medication to look untouched enough that I wouldn't notice. But I did. As I sat there staring at the table, I thought about the doctor. His eyes flicking toward the door, his voice dropping below a whisper, the warning he slipped into my ear when no one was listening, something he didn't write down, something he didn't say aloud twice. That kind of warning doesn't come from assumptions. It comes from evidence. And now I had mine. The sound of the front door opening jolted me so hard the organizer nearly slipped from my lap. Marcy stepped inside with grocery bags, humming softly, a tune too cheerful and too rehearsed. When her eyes landed on the table and saw the bottles lined up, she froze for a fraction of a second, so quick most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. "Need help with your pills?" she asked, setting the bags down slowly. Her voice didn't match her eyes. Her expression didn't match her body language. And that smile, thin, practiced, stretched just a hair too wide, cracked the last piece of denial I had left in me. "No," I said, keeping my tone steady. "I've already taken care of them." She nodded, but her jaw tightened. Another tell. "I'll put these groceries away then," she murmured, moving a little too fast, a little too eager to get away from the table. As she turned her back, something in me hardened. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't age. This wasn't confusion. This was deliberate tampering, deliberate movement of medication, deliberate secrecy, and someone who tampered with your pills wasn't trying to help you. They were trying to control you, or worse. With my heart pounding and my hands still shaking, I quietly slipped one of the strange pills into a small Ziploc bag I kept for leftovers. I didn't know what my next step was yet, but I knew this. Whatever was happening in my home had crossed the line from suspicious to dangerous, and I wasn't going to ignore a danger that looked me straight in the face. The day the truth finally exposed itself started out painfully ordinary. I'd spent most of the afternoon resting in my recliner, the strange pill I'd saved, tucked safely inside a Ziploc bag hidden in the pocket of my robe. I was quiet that day, quieter than usual, and I could tell Marcy noticed. She kept drifting through the house, glancing at me, checking the clock, hovering in doorways like she was waiting for something. Her presence felt heavier than usual, like the air around her carried some secret tension she couldn't fully hide. By early evening, the sky outside had turned a deep orange and purple. I pretended to nap, letting my breathing slow, keeping my eyes just barely closed. My hip ached, but I forced myself to lie still. After a few minutes, I heard her footsteps, light, careful, the kind of steps someone takes when they don't want to be heard. She paused near the living room, waiting, maybe trying to see if I really was asleep. Then she moved. Not toward the bathroom, not toward the laundry room, but toward my bedroom. I opened my eyes the second she disappeared down the hallway. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay where I was, to keep pretending, to remain harmless and unaware. But the need to know outweighed everything else. I eased myself out of the recliner, gripping my cane, trying not to make the floor creak. I followed her slowly, stopping just before the corner. From that angle, I could see the edge of my bedroom door, open just slightly, and the shadow of her body moving inside. My bedroom contains my personal things, my letters, my documents, my safe. If she was in there, she wasn't there to fold blankets. I edged closer, keeping to the wall, and then I heard her voice. "Yeah, I'm here now," she whispered. She was on the phone. I held my breath. "No, she hasn't figured it out," she continued. "I told you, she's slow. She doesn't know what half these pills even do. Once the dosage drops, her blood pressure will again, and they'll have to admit her. That's when you handle the paperwork." My blood turned cold. Blood pressure, admission, paperwork. She wasn't talking to a friend. She wasn't talking to a doctor. She was talking to someone who had a plan, and that plan was centered around me. I stepped a little closer, just enough to hear her more clearly. "No, I haven't gotten into the safe yet," she said sharply. "But I will. She keeps her documents in there, I'm sure of it. Once she's admitted, we'll have access. You just need to be ready to sign when the hospital contacts you." My heart lurched. The safe, my documents, hospital admission. Sign when the hospital contacts you. This wasn't about medication. This was about control. This was about guardianship. This was about someone trying to become the one in charge of my life, and everything tied to my name. And suddenly, every strange question she'd ask me made perfect, terrifying sense. Who handles your finances? Does your son have power of attorney? When's the last time you updated your will? Do you keep important documents somewhere safe? She wasn't curious. She was gathering information. But the next words she said broke any remaining hope that this was simply her acting alone. "Yes, I talked to her," Marcy whispered. "She said the sooner we get the paperwork started, the better. She's tired of waiting." Her. My chest tightened painfully. There were only 2 women in my life she could mean, a cousin who lives out of state or my daughter-in-law. And I already knew the cousin didn't even know I'd had surgery. She sends postcards once a year, and that's the extent of our contact. That left only one person, the person who recommended Marcy, the person who insisted I needed help, the person who kept telling me I was lucky to have her, my daughter-in-law. Marcy lowered her voice even more, frustration creeping in. "Look, she's stubborn, okay? She doesn't just hand over documents, but the pills are doing what they're supposed to. She's been drowsy, confused. It'll work. Just stick to the plan." A sickening metallic flavor filled my mouth. Confused. Drowsy. They were trying to drug me into a condition where I'd seem incompetent, someone legally unable to care for herself, someone who could be placed under guardianship, someone whose home, savings, and choices would shift into their hands. And Marcy wasn't just participating, she was orchestrating it. I felt something ancient rise up inside me, something fierce and rooted, the instinct to survive, the instinct to protect myself, the instinct to fight. Marcy's footsteps shifted as she began moving toward the bedroom door again. I pulled myself back into the hallway shadows just in time as she stepped out, holding her phone at her side and scanning the hallway like she could feel the air had changed. She didn't see me. Not yet. She walked down the hall and toward the kitchen, muttering under her breath. As soon as she disappeared from view, I slipped into my bedroom. My safe was slightly crooked. The rug in front of it had been pushed forward. She had been trying to open it. She hadn't succeeded, but the attempt was enough to make my hands shake. I placed my palm against the safe, cold metal against warm skin, and whispered to myself, "You're not crazy. You're not imagining this. You heard her. You know the truth now." The truth was simple and terrifying. I wasn't just in danger. I was the target. And now that I knew that, there was no going back. When the full truth settled on me, it didn't come like thunder. It came like a slow, suffocating tide. I closed my bedroom door and pressed my back against it, suddenly aware of how loud my heartbeat sounded in the quiet room. My home, The place where I'd raised my son, laughed with my husband, prayed every morning, no longer felt like a safe haven. It felt like a trap I had been slowly lured into. And the people who were supposed to care for me were the ones tightening the snare. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my hip throbbing with every breath, but the pain didn't compare to the heaviness in my chest. I stared at my hands resting on my lap, noticing how they shook, not from age, not from weakness, but from a grief so sharp I could taste it. Betrayal has a sound, you know. It's quiet. It's the sound of your own mind replaying moments when you dismissed your instincts, moments when you trusted the wrong people because they shared your blood or your last name. I whispered to myself, how could they? And immediately the question felt naive. I knew exactly how. Some people don't see elders as human beings with whole lives behind them. They see opportunity, assets, signatures, houses, medical vulnerabilities. They see a moment of weakness as a door cracked open just wide enough to slip through. But hearing Marcy say, my daughter-in-law was tired of waiting, that cut deeper than I expected. I thought of every holiday dinner where she'd smiled politely across the table, every birthday gift she handed me with a stiff hug, every moment she'd insisted she was worried about me living alone. I replayed them one by one, and suddenly the warmth behind them evaporated, revealing something cold and calculated beneath. My throat tightened. A tear slid down my cheek, then another, and soon I was crying without making a sound, just silent streams that carried years of memories and a fresh, heavy sense of loss. I had lost my husband. I had lost the life I once knew. And now, it seemed, I had lost the illusion that my family, my own son's wife, cared about anything but what I owned. The worst part? I found myself thinking about my son. Would he believe me, or would he side with her? Would he look at me the way people look at the elderly on the news, confused, fragile, unreliable? That fear hollowed me out from the inside. My thoughts spiraled faster than I could catch them. What if the pills had worked the way they wanted them to? What if the doctor hadn't warned me? What if I hadn't checked the cabinet? What if I had taken one extra dose on a tired evening and never woken up again? The reality hit me so hard I had to grip the bed frame to stay upright. I could have died, and someone in my own family might have signed the papers afterwards without shedding a tear. That realization broke something in me, not my strength, but the last piece of innocence I had about the people closest to me. For the first time since Marcy arrived in my home, I felt real fear. Not just suspicion, not just unease, fear. Fear that if I made one wrong move, if I confronted her too soon, if I let on that I knew the truth, the situation could turn dangerous fast. People willing to poison you don't handle confrontation well. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I needed to sit. I needed air. I needed something steady, something alive. But I couldn't call 911 yet without solid evidence. I couldn't call my son. He might tell her everything. I couldn't call my daughter-in-law for obvious reasons. And my closest friend lived 2 states away. That kind of isolation is its own kind of danger. I sat on my bed with both hands pressed against my face, trying to breathe through the storm inside me. I had survived many things in my life: poverty, widowhood, surgery, heartbreak, but nothing had ever made me feel small the way this did, because this wasn't about struggle or hardship. This was about someone quietly plotting to erase me. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Long enough for the moonlight to shift across my bedroom floor, long enough for my tears to dry into thin lines on my cheeks, long enough for the fear to settle, not disappear, but settle into a tight, determined knot inside me. Eventually, I whispered into the empty room, I have to stay alive. Not I want to, not I hope to, but I have to. And the moment I said it, something changed. Fear didn't leave me, but resolve grew right alongside it. Yes, I was betrayed. Yes, I was scared. Yes, I was alone in this house with a woman who wanted me weaker, but I wasn't finished, and I wasn't helpless. Something inside me, something my mother, grandmother, and every woman before me had passed down, stood up tall in my chest and whispered back, "You're still here. Now fight smart." After sitting in that darkness, after letting the weight of betrayal press down on me until it nearly crushed my chest, a strange clarity began to rise. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, like the slow tightening of a knot you didn't know you were tying. Fear was still there, yes, but something else began moving alongside it. The instinct to survive, the instinct to think, the instinct to strategize. I wiped my face and stood up, leaning heavily on my cane. The room felt different now. Not safer, no, but sharper. Every shadow had meaning. Every sound held a possibility. I had spent weeks doubting myself, dismissing my intuition, letting others tell me what was good for me, what was safe. But now I knew the truth. Trusting blindly had put me in danger. And the only way out was to trust myself again. My eyes drifted to the top of my dresser, to a drawer I hadn't opened in a long time. Inside it was something I'd nearly forgotten about, a tiny black box no bigger than my palm. I reached for it, my fingers brushing off the thin layer of dust. When I opened the lid, a small camera lens stared back at me like an old friend. I bought that mini camera years ago when my grandson was a toddler. We used it as a baby cam whenever he visited, just to make sure he didn't roll off the guest bed. When he grew older, I packed it away and forgot all about it. But now, holding it in my hands, I realized it was exactly what I needed. The house was quiet. Marcy was in the kitchen, humming that same fake, cheerful tune, unaware that something inside me had shifted. I tested the camera, and to my surprise, it still worked. Grainy, a little outdated, but enough to record what mattered, enough to catch the truth she thought she had hidden so well. I moved slowly, carefully, placing cameras in the places she lingered most. The kitchen cabinet where she handled my medication, the hallway near my bedroom door, the living room shelf angled toward my safe. Each placement took time, and every second felt like a countdown. If she came down the hall unexpectedly, if she walked in too soon, it would be over. But fear sharpened me, made me precise. I placed each device as quietly as someone slipping secrets into the cracks of a house. Once everything was in place, I returned to the bedroom and took out a small spiral notebook. I began writing down every detail I remembered from the past few weeks: times, phrases, unusual behavior, dates when medication felt off, the doctor's whisper, the strange pills, the leftover residue, the overheard phone call. My hands moved fast, fueled by adrenaline and anger. This was no longer a series of odd moments. This was a pattern, a plan, a crime. Then I did something I hadn't done since all this began. I picked up the phone. Not to call my son, not to call my daughter-in-law, but to call my oldest friend, Ruth, a retired nurse who had seen more medical manipulation in her career than anyone cared to admit. She lived across town, and when she heard my voice, thin, shaky, she didn't even let me finish my sentence. "I'm coming," she said. "Don't take anything, don't confront anyone, and don't stay alone with her more than you have to." That one sentence gave me more strength than she knew. Before hanging up, I slipped the strange pill from its Ziploc bag onto a white napkin and took a picture. Then I photographed the bottle, the residue, the scratched caps, every piece of evidence I had. I didn't need to know what the pill was made of yet. I just needed proof that something was wrong. And then, just as I put the phone down, I heard footsteps approaching. Fast, sharp, purposeful. I closed the notebook and slipped it under my pillow just as Marcy appeared in the doorway. Her smile was too quick, too bright. "Everything okay?" she asked, eyes scanning the room like she was checking for something out of place. "Oh, I'm just resting," I replied calmly, calmer than I felt. Thinking. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment too long, and I saw something flicker behind her expression. Suspicion. She sensed a shift, even if she didn't know what caused it. I met her gaze without flinching. "You should rest too," I said with a polite smile. "It's been a long day." Something in my tone must have unsettled her, because she hesitated before leaving the room. And when she walked away, I heard her footsteps slow, then pause outside the kitchen, right where I had hidden the first camera. My breath caught as she stood there. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. Was she listening? Thinking? Sensing the power shift she couldn't quite explain? Finally, she moved again. And in that moment, I realized something. The fear hadn't left me, but it no longer controlled me. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing, watching, documenting. For the first time since my fall, the balance of power in my own home began to tilt back toward me. Not fully, not loudly, but enough. The hunter didn't know it yet, but the roles were starting to reverse. Once the first camera was in place and my notebook filled with dates, times, and details, I felt something inside me click. The shift from victim to strategist. It didn't erase the fear, but it sharpened my mind in a way I hadn't felt in years. I knew that people who tamper with an elder's medication don't stop on their own. They escalate. And the only way to protect myself was to stay 3 steps ahead of whatever Marcy and whoever was behind her had planned. That night, I waited until the house fell silent. I listened for her footsteps, her breathing, her movements, making sure she was fully asleep. When I was certain, I moved through the house with slow, steady steps, leaning on my cane when my hip ached, but refusing to let the pain slow me down. I checked the cameras. Each blinked faintly, hidden well enough that she wouldn't notice unless she was searching specifically for them. Then I took the next step. Documentation. I laid everything out on the kitchen table under the dim stove light. The tampered pill, the opened organizer, the bottles with scratches on the caps. The pictures I had taken earlier, I took more photos, making sure each image had a timestamp. I even recorded a short video explaining what happened in my own voice in case anything went wrong. "My name is Gloria Harris," I said quietly into the camera. "If anything happens to me, this is what you need to look at first." Hearing myself say it made a tremor run down my arms, but it also made the danger feel real enough to fight. The next morning, I called the doctor's office. I didn't speak to him directly, he was with patients, but I left a detailed message for the nurse, asking for a full medication review and requesting that the doctor call me privately. Not in the presence of my caretaker, not with anyone else around. Then came the second phone call. Ruth. She arrived that afternoon, letting herself in through the back door like she used to when we were younger. Ruth didn't waste time with pleasantries. The second she saw my face, she set her purse down and said, "Where is the evidence?" I showed her everything, the pill, the photos, the organizer, the cabinet. Each detail I told her made her lips press tighter, her eyes grow sharper. "This isn't neglect," she said quietly. "This is intentional, and whoever is doing this knows exactly how medication works on someone in your condition." I nodded. "I heard her talking on the phone, Ruth. They're planning to admit me. They want access to my documents, my safe." Ruth didn't gasp. She didn't panic. She just inhaled deeply, as if confirming a suspicion she already had. "Then we need a chain of proof," she said. "Something they can't deny or twist." Together we reviewed the footage from the kitchen camera. It was grainy but clear enough. Marcy opened the medication cabinet, took out bottles, twisted caps, moved pills from one container to another, then put everything back. She checked over her shoulder twice, clearly aware she shouldn't be doing it. Ruth's jaw tightened. "Good," she said, "very good. This is exactly what we need." We spent hours creating a file, dates, photos, video clips, transcribed notes. Ruth helped me organize it in a folder labeled insurance papers because she knew Marcy wouldn't touch anything with a boring name. Then we duplicated everything onto a USB drive and a password-protected cloud folder. If anything happened to the physical copies, the digital versions would survive. Finally, Ruth asked the most important question. Do you want to involve the police yet? I shook my head slowly. Not until we have something undeniable. Not until they have no way to twist it against me. Ruth nodded. Then we keep gathering, and we stay alert. Before she left, she leaned in close, the way the doctor had, and said, "You're doing the right thing. But don't let her see you change. People like that get dangerous when they feel exposed." That warning stayed with me long after Ruth closed the door, so I played the role. I let Marcy serve me meals. I let her hand me water. I let her talk to me in that sweet voice that now felt like poison wrapped in honey. Every fake smile she gave me, I returned. Every question she asked, I answered vaguely. Every moment she thought I was resting, I was watching. The cameras captured more than enough. She tampered with the bottles again. She tried to peek inside my bedroom while pretending to dust. She looked inside the trash can for pill remnants, probably making sure I wasn't discarding anything suspicious. She checked the window blinds to see if anyone outside could see her. She wasn't just a caretaker. She was a predator, testing boundaries, 1 inch at a time. But the thing she didn't realize, the thing she couldn't possibly suspect, was that I had already turned the house into a quiet battleground. And I wasn't the prey anymore. I wasn't waiting to be rescued. I was building my case, piece by piece, truth by truth, recording her lies as calmly as she carried them out. And the day would come, soon, when everything she had done in the shadows would be dragged into the light. The day everything unraveled began with a quiet tension in the air, one of those mornings where the sunlight feels too bright and the silence feels too heavy, like the world is holding its breath. I woke up early, long before Marcy stirred, and sat in the living room with my cane across my lap. My notebook was tucked carefully beside me, the USB drive hidden in my pocket, and the cameras silently recording. Today wasn't a day for fear. Today was a day for truth. At exactly 9:15 a.m., my doorbell rang. I didn't move. I just said, "Come in," knowing exactly who it was. Ruth stepped inside first, carrying her large black tote, the one she always brought to the hospital when she used to work long shifts. Behind her, walking with professional calm, was Mr. Daniels, the elder law attorney she had arranged to meet us. And right behind him, holding a sealed envelope, was Officer Hayes, a community liaison who worked specifically with elder abuse cases. Their presence filled the room like a wall of iron. Marcy emerged from the hallway with her eyes wide and mouth tight. She froze when she saw the three of them. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to smile but failing miserably. I smiled back, a small, calm curve of the lips, the kind you give when you finally see the finish line. "We're just going to have a little talk," I said. Mr. Daniels stepped forward first. "Ms. Harris has asked us to review some concerns about her care. We're here to make sure everything is in order." Marcy's eyes darted to me, then to the hallway, then to the medication cabinet. "In order? Of course, things are in order." She laughed, a thin, high laugh. "This is silly." Ruth crossed her arms. "Then you won't mind answering a few questions." Marcy opened her mouth to object, but Officer Hayes spoke before she could. "For your information, Ms. Harris has a legal right to request oversight. Any caretaker should have no issue with transparency." The room grew still. Marcy swallowed. Mr. Daniels placed his briefcase on the table, opened it slowly, and withdrew a single printed sheet. "Ms. Harris," he said, turning to me with deliberate clarity, "could you please tell us what you noticed about your medication this past month?" My voice was steady, not a tremble, not a shake. "The pills were changed," I said, "more than once, and I have proof." Marcy's face stiffened. "That's a lie." Ruth didn't flinch. "Then let's look." I reached into my pocket and handed the USB drive to Mr. Daniels. He plugged it into his tablet and turned the screen toward the room. Then, with one tap of his finger, the footage played. There she was, Marcy, on the screen. In grainy but undeniable detail, she stood at my medication cabinet, opening bottles, switching pills, checking labels, and looking over her shoulder every few seconds. The footage showed her emptying part of a bottle, replacing pills with others, screwing the cap back on, and wiping the rim as if she knew fingerprints mattered. Her hand flew to her mouth. That's taken out of context. Ruth raised an eyebrow. What context would justify drug manipulation? Officer Hayes stepped forward. Ms. Marcy, altering, let alone replacing, an elder's medication is a criminal offense, and based on this footage, it appears to be intentional. Marcy stumbled backward. You don't understand. I was told... Ah, there it was. Told by who? I asked quietly. Her eyes flickered, panic rising behind them. Who told you to do this, Marcy? Mr. Daniels pressed. I can explain, she stammered. We're listening, Ruth said sharply. Marcy's mask finally cracked. Her breath hitched and she whispered, She said it was for the best. She said Ms. Harris couldn't live alone. She said it was only temporary until the hospital admitted her for evaluation. Daniels narrowed his eyes. Who is she? Marcy looked at me, then at the officer, then away. My daughter-in-law, I said softly, finishing the sentence she couldn't. Marcy broke. She said the paperwork would go through faster if Ms. Harris seemed impaired. She promised I'd be compensated once the guardianship was done. I swear I didn't mean harm, I thought. Officer Hayes lifted a hand. That's enough. You need to stop talking now unless you want to incriminate yourself further. Marcy started crying. Loud, desperate, ugly tears. But guilt didn't move me. Not today. Because the next moment changed everything. The front door opened. My son walked in. He saw the officer, the lawyer, Ruth, and then, finally, me. Confusion shifted to fear as his gaze darted around the room. Mom, what's going on? I met his eyes, steady, calm, no trembling. Why don't you ask your wife? I said gently. He stiffened. My wife? What is she... Marcy sobbed. She told me to do it. She planned everything. My son's face went pale as I'd ever seen since the day his father died. She, I continued, tried to make me look incompetent, tried to adjust my medication, tried to force an admission so she could sign papers in my place. He shook his head, shocked. No. She couldn't. The officer stepped forward. Sir, this appears to be part of a coordinated attempt to establish unauthorized control over your mother's finances and health care decisions. My son's knees buckled slightly. Oh my God. I placed my cane on the floor and slowly stood up, walking toward him. Baby, I know you didn't know, but now you do. And we are going to deal with this. He nodded, eyes shining, jaw clenched in devastation. Behind him, Marcy crumbled onto the couch, still sobbing into her hands. Officer Hayes took out his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 5. I have a confirmed case of elder medication tampering, requesting transport. Marcy looked up, terror in her eyes. Please, please. I didn't mean to... But her words vanished under the weight of the truth playing on the lawyer's tablet. And in that moment, the power in my house finally shifted back to where it belonged. To me. The hours after Marcy's arrest felt unreal, like watching someone else's life unfold through thick glass. One moment, she was sobbing on my couch. The next, she was led out of my house in handcuffs, her cries echoing weakly across the porch. Officer Hayes recited her rights with a steady voice, and Marcy kept whimpering, I didn't mean to hurt her. I didn't mean... But the footage, the pill samples, and her own panicked confession had already sealed her fate. Intent didn't matter anymore. Evidence did. As the patrol car drove away, the sun hit the windows just right, and for the first time in weeks, the light didn't feel threatening. It felt cleansing. But the story didn't end with Marcy. Not even close. My son stood in the living room afterward, shoulders slumped, face pale, hands on his hips like he was trying to hold himself together. He kept shaking his head over and over, whispering, I can't believe she would do this. I just can't. He refused to sit, as if his body didn't know how to rest while the foundation of his family was crumbling beneath him. I spoke gently. "Baby, sit with me." He didn't sit, but he walked toward me, eyes shining. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" His voice cracked. The guilt was eating him alive. I reached for his hand. "Because I didn't know for sure, and because I knew she had your ear. If I'd said something without proof, she would have twisted it, made me look confused or bitter." I squeezed his fingers. "I needed you to see the truth clearly." He sank onto the couch beside me, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I brought her into your home. I trusted her judgment. I put you in danger without even realizing it." "You didn't know," I said softly, "but now you do, and now we move forward." Ruth stepped closer, resting a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "She didn't just manipulate you," she said. "She manipulated the system. People like her know exactly how to use medical language and family concern to their advantage." Mr. Daniels, the attorney, cleared his throat gently. "We have enough for a strong case, Mrs. Harris. Medication tampering, attempted elder abuse, attempted fraud, conspiracy to commit guardianship manipulation." He shook his head. "It's a long list." My son flinched at the word conspiracy. It was a heavy word, and hearing it applied to his own wife felt like a blow to the gut. "What happens to her?" he asked quietly. Mr. Daniels adjusted his glasses. "Legally, Marcy will likely face felony charges. As for your wife, well, once we bring her in for questioning, the connections will become clear. Phone records, financial communications. The fact that she hired Marcy, coordinated the plan, and stood to benefit financially if your mother were declared incompetent." He let the sentence hang in the air. "It will not go well for her." The room fell silent. My son stared at the floor. "I married someone who tried to harm my mother. I don't know how to process that." I rested my hand on his back. "You trusted your partner. That's not a crime. But turning away from the truth now would be." Tears finally spilled down his cheeks, and I let him cry. He wasn't crying for me. He was crying for the man he thought he was, the marriage he thought he had, the family he thought he'd built. Betrayal breaks more than one heart. Later that week, everything accelerated. Police questioned my daughter-in-law, and it didn't take long for the cracks in her story to show. Denial shifted into excuses into blaming Marcy into blaming stress, and misunderstandings. But evidence speaks louder than rehearsed tears. Phone logs, messages, call recordings from Marcy's device, all of it pointed back to her. She wasn't arrested, not immediately, but a criminal investigation was launched, and pending charges hung over her like a storm cloud ready to break. She moved out of my son's house 2 days later, not by choice. By the look on my son's face when he told her to leave, I knew something inside him had changed permanently. Meanwhile, the police filed formal charges against Marcy: elder medication tampering, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, attempted fraud, attempted unlawful guardianship manipulation. Each charge carried weight. Together, they painted a chilling picture of exactly how close I had come to losing control of my life. People think justice is loud: sirens, handcuffs, courtroom drama. But real justice is quiet. It's the sigh you release when you realize you survived. It's the moment the fear that lived in your walls finally dissolves into the air. It's waking up the next morning without wondering if the person in your kitchen is there to help you or hurt you. When Officer Hayes came by to update me, he placed a hand over his heart as he said, "Mrs. Harris, you saved your own life. Most people don't catch this in time." And that truth hit me harder than any betrayal. I was still here because I listened, because I paid attention, because I didn't give my fear the last word. Justice didn't erase the pain. It didn't undo the betrayal. It didn't magically restore peace. But it did give me something just as important: control, safety, a chance to rebuild my life on my terms. And for a woman who came inches from losing everything, that was justice enough. In the weeks that followed the investigation, my house finally felt like mine again. The silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. The shadows were no longer suspicious. They were familiar. I woke up each morning breathing easier, knowing that the danger that once moved quietly through my hallways had been removed, step by step, piece by piece. Healing didn't come all at once. It came slowly, in small, steady waves, the way sunlight creeps across a porch at dawn. My son visited every evening during that first week, not because he thought I needed help, but because he needed reassurance that I was really okay, that I was still me, still whole, still standing. He'd sit at the edge of my porch, elbows on his knees, talking softly about everything he was trying to process. "Mom, I don't know how I let things get this far," he said one night, voice rough with remorse. I touched his hand and told him the truth. "What matters isn't what happened behind your back. What matters is how you face it now." And he did. He faced it with honesty, with grief, and eventually with courage. The divorce papers were filed within a month. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply handed them over to the woman who had plotted to dismantle my life and said, "You don't get to be in our family if you can't protect it." I saw the heartbreak in his eyes, but I also saw something else. A man reclaiming his own integrity. Meanwhile, my own recovery felt like a journey back to myself. I started physical therapy again, this time with a little more energy, a little more purpose. My steps grew steadier, my hips strengthened, and with it, so did the part of me that had been bruised emotionally for far too long. One afternoon, I took a bus ride downtown, not because I had an appointment or an errand, but because I wanted to feel the world moving again. Savannah's streets bustled with life. Tourists laughing near the squares, children running under the shade of old oak trees, artists setting up easels near the fountains. I sat on a bench near Forsyth Park, breathing in the smell of warm grass and magnolias, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had stepped out of the fog that had been wrapped around me. I also rejoined my church group. The ladies there, women I'd prayed with, cooked with, cried with, surrounded me with warmth when they learned what happened. They didn't pity me. They admired me. "You caught her," one of them said. "You saved yourself." Their belief reminded me that my story wasn't only about betrayal, it was about resilience. Ruth remained by my side through it all. She helped me install proper locks, secure my medical records, and set up a system where only authorized people could access my medications. "Never again," she said firmly as she labeled the final drawer, and I smiled because she was right. Never again would I allow someone into my home unchecked. Never again would I ignore my instincts. Never again would I let politeness override my safety. The biggest change, though, wasn't in my house or in my routines. It was in me. I learned to listen. To myself, to my body, to the quiet warnings that whisper before danger screams. I learned that survival doesn't always look like running or fighting. Sometimes it looks like documenting, planning, waiting, and striking when the moment is right. I learned that age does not make you weak. Trusting the wrong people does. 6 weeks after Marcy's arrest, I took the final step in reclaiming my freedom. I hosted a small dinner for my church friends and my son. Nothing fancy, just baked chicken, collard greens, cornbread, and sweet tea. But as I watched everyone gather around the table, laughing and passing dishes like they always had, I realized how close I had come to losing all of this. My life, my independence, my home, my sense of safety. But I hadn't lost any of it. I was still here, stronger, wiser, sharper, unbroken. After everyone left, I stood on my porch and looked out at the pecan tree my husband planted decades ago. Its branches swayed gently in the evening breeze, catching the last golden slant of the sun. I felt him there with me, not in a haunting way, but in the quiet strength he always carried. "I'm okay," I whispered to the air. "I made it through. And for the first time since the doctor leaned in and whispered, "Double check your caretaker," I believe those words fully. My life wasn't returning to what it was before. It was becoming something new, something stronger, something mine. In the quiet that followed those long, difficult weeks, I found myself sitting alone in my kitchen one morning, sunlight pouring across the table like a warm blessing. The house was silent, but not the heavy silence of fear. This was a peaceful, quiet, steady stillness that told me I was finally safe, finally in control, finally living in a home that belonged solely to me again. I ran my fingers along the smooth surface of my mug, feeling the warmth seep into my hands, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't flinch at small sounds or wonder who was moving in the hallway. My home had returned to its old rhythm, and so had I. When you survive something like this, something quiet, calculated, and creeping, you come out the other side changed, not broken, not bitter, just wiser, more aware, more protective of the life you've built. I learned that danger doesn't always announce itself with sirens or storms. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it smiles, sometimes it knocks softly at your door, wearing the face of someone you were told to trust. That is a lesson I will never forget. And I learned that intuition, especially in women my age, is a kind of inheritance, passed down from mothers, aunts, grandmothers, and every woman who's ever had to survive something she didn't ask for. It's that tightening in your chest, that restless feeling in the middle of the night, that quiet sense that something isn't quite right. When we ignore that voice, we betray ourselves. When we listen to it, we save our own lives. I think about the women watching this, women who might be living with a caretaker they don't fully trust, or dealing with a family member who's too eager to manage their finances, or feeling unheard when something strange keeps happening in their homes. If you're listening to this right now, hear me clearly. You are not crazy. You are not imagining things. Your instincts are your first line of defense. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And I also learned something about family and how blood can mean everything or nothing at all. My son stood by me when the truth came out, and I saw him break apart and rebuild himself right in front of me. But I also saw that not everyone with your last name has your best interest at heart. Loyalty is a choice, not a guarantee. Love should never come with paperwork attached. Even now, when I walk past the medication cabinet, I pause, not out of fear, but out of gratitude, grateful that I caught it in time. Gratitude that the doctor whispered when he did. Grateful that I chose to fight back. Gratitude that the truth came to light before someone took my life and called it an accident. Grateful that I am still here to tell this story. So, here's the truth I want to leave you with. Safety is not selfish. Protecting yourself is not disrespect. Asking questions is not difficult. Refusing to be controlled is not being ungrateful. You are allowed to guard your life fiercely. You are allowed to trust your instincts loudly. You are allowed to survive unapologetically. And if someone ever makes you doubt your own mind, pay attention. Their doubt may be the disguise they use while they move pieces behind your back. As I sit here today, breathing in the soft morning air, hearing the familiar hum of my refrigerator and the distant rustle of the pecan tree outside, I know one thing with absolute certainty. The danger is gone. The house is mine. My life is mine. And so is my story. If you've ever been through something like this, or if you're going through it now, I want to hear from you. Share your story, your instinct, your warning sign. You never know who your words might protect. Thank you for listening. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe, share, and stay safe, truly safe, with the people who deserve to be in your life.